Let's get you the view of India Inc. Three of the finest CEOs from corporate India join us for this leg of the discussion right here in Business Tonight. R. Seshasayee, Vice Chairman of the Hinduja Group, Vineet Nayyar, Vice Chairman of Tech Mahindra, and Sanjay Nayar, CEO and Country Head of KKR India, join in to analyse the performance of this government over the last 365 days. Mr. Seshasayee, I'll start with you. Do you believe the government has met the expectations of corporate India, or are you impatient with the pace of change given the political capital that this government had?
Well, let's put it this way. I think we have now a government which is in control, has had no whiff of corruption, is firmly in command. And so this is the best opportunity for us now to rebuild India again. And I think it's important that we strengthen the hands of the government. And even if the government has performed 7 out of 10, that's great news. And I think we need to therefore take it forward and see how we can support. And therefore, I am of the view that an over-analysis of where the government has failed and which might lead on to some destructive criticism, to my mind, is something that we must really avoid at this stage.
7 on 10 for the first year from Mr. R. Seshasayee. But Sanjay, let me get it to you. This wasn't an ordinary mandate, was it? Corporate India was euphoric this day last year. How can we forget that? Do you believe the government has met all those expectations of corporate India? How do you look at the first year of this government?
Sandeep, I think that, look, I'm not going to be able to comment on everybody's behalf, but I would say on behalf of people like us who are long-term investors and deal with actual corporates and financial institutions, I think the expectations were obviously very high because they were coming from a bit of a low, and it was obvious given the kind of mandate the government had, the expectations were high. But I think if you just take a step back and look at what all has been achieved, or at least the intent and the sincerity with which they're trying to make changes at a very deep level, I would say there's no reason to be despondent, and I think you've got to give the government a bit more time. Expectations do run ahead, but I would say that's fine. I mean, in a way, it does put pressure on the government and the bureaucracy to perform. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, yeah.
Right, at least Sanjay agrees that expectations were unreal. But Mr. Nayar, if I may come to you, do you concede that expectations from the government were actually unreal? And has the irrational exuberance at one level really made way for cautious optimism after a year in office?
Most importantly, an enabling policy is one which creates an environment which is of the right kind. I think that has been done. That has been done, and I am pretty certain that you will start seeing a takeoff over the next 2 years. But will we grow at the pace of some of the determined non-democratic countries? Perhaps not. And God bless us for that, because ultimately all decisions need to be taken by consensus rather than by one individual.
God truly bless us for that. But Sanjay, there has been a marked improvement as far as every macroeconomic parameter is concerned. The deficit's under control, inflation has halved, we are seeing early signs of growth. Is this largely on account of the crash in crude oil prices, or do you give some credit to the government, and has any policy really played a part of macros looking up?
The macroeconomic front, I think we have been lucky to have a pretty easy commodity cycle, which is good. I think that gives us some reprieve on all our deficit front. But frankly, we are running twin deficits. We have a situation where inflation may be down. Inflation is down, but I think inflationary expectations are still very much there. One can say that real savings are positive. Now you can look at it two ways. You can think it's zero to maybe slightly negative. It depends upon inflationary expectations. I think capital that we have received in the last 1 year has been quite volatile. So one has to be very careful about, how do you get sustainable capital in the long run. So I think on the macro front, there's no magic. I think we've got some time, and I think we have another year ahead of us to put things on a clear map. How do you bring the composition of the fiscal deficit, not the absolute amount, but at least the composition should be a lot more conducive, so that you can have a consistent supply side impetus. How do you bring the revenue deficit and the current account deficit into a better shape, which is reflective of a lot more independence and not dependent upon energy prices all the time. And I think I would love to see a game plan where you reform taxes such that you just have a much more rationalized and broader tax base. I mean, our revenue to GDP, tax revenue to GDP is extremely low. So I mean, I think those are the kind of things that one needs to look out for on the overall side. Now, whether it's RBI or the government, I don't think it matters. I think there's a lot of things in the government's camp right now which they need to do.
A lot of the government's camp that needs to be done. Vineet Nayyar, let me get you into the discussion. The macros have certainly improved, like Sanjay was pointing out, but it hasn't really percolated on the ground. What is it that you think needs to be done to get corporate India back to investment mode? That's something that hasn't happened yet.
I mean, though I'm not an expert, but I do believe that interest rates will have to come down, not marginally, but quite significantly for investment in manufacturing to commence. Compare yourself with China. Their interest rates for certain sectors is at 2%. Look at Korea when it was growing up. Through their what they call window guidance, they had brought the interest rates on priority sector to 2 to 3%. They had a huge boost. True, you can argue that this causes distortions, but sometimes this development is a result of a distortion. So I do believe that that is one area where we would need to look at it very closely.
Interest rates need to come down. But Sanjay, why has the investment cycle not turned yet? Surely interest rates can't be the only reason. Is it due to a demand slump, high cost of credit like Mr. Nayyar was pointing out, delay in clearances or something else? What's the reason?
Sandeep, it's all of the above. I mean, we deal with a lot of corporates. Yes, we interact with them. I think the confidence is still rather low. Now, of course, they expected magic, which is not going to happen. And I don't think it was going to happen anyway. I think corporates are the ones who will finally have to build the country, okay? And the private sector is the one that has to do. They are right now laden with a lot of leverage. The leverage in the system is quite high. There's mismatch of amortization to projects coming on stream. In some cases, there is issues of having gotten resources out of turn, and therefore those are being held back now. So for all the good and the bad reasons, I mean, last 4 or 5 years have led to corporate India to have made quite a bit of investment in infrastructure especially, and in certain other fields which really haven't paid back. So I think, the confidence will take time to come back. They need to see some returns on the money they put, or they need to be able to cure their delayed installments to the banks. And finally, they've got to feel good about investing again in India. It's a pity if we think we can build this country with help of foreigners or foreign capital. It'll have to be built by the Indian businesses and frankly, with the help of local savings. That's ultimately where we'll have to go. But I think this government gets it, and I think they are doing the things really, as I said earlier, bottoms up. It will take time. You've got to get local savings, you've got to get a robust capital market, and you've got to get the investment climate much more positive for the private sector.
Mr. Seshasayee, if I may take Sanjay's point forward, this country will have to be built by corporates like yourselves and domestic savings. Why do you then think the government has failed, at least in its first year in office, to kickstart the investment cycle?
As I said, I think there is excess capacity. So we have to wait until the excess capacity is taken up. I would like to believe that perhaps we have about 20-25% excess capacity in practically every industry. And if you don't count the Indian capacity, there is global capacity sitting in China, for example, which is available for imports. And therefore, in this kind of climate, you're not going to find a large number of people betting on future demand increasing and therefore putting new investments on capacity creation. That's number one. And number two, also the fact is that the new entrepreneurs who would come with deep pockets, willing to bet on equity and start something new, I don't see that too many of them now in the horizon. The entrepreneurs who came in about a decade ago, particularly in infrastructure, are nursing their wounds. They are overstretched, and the corporate world has seen a very high level of gearing in that. So therefore, this is a moment for consolidation. So therefore, don't expect something to start immediately in terms of very large doses of investment in a large number of industries, either from the domestic entrepreneurs or from people coming from outside the country. It's got to be a slow process, but I think the sentiment is good, that the climate has improved. So as and when things begin to look better in terms of capacity utilization or new technology coming in, India would certainly be one of the contenders for getting these investments.
But you know, Mr. Seshasayee, 63% of the CEOs who we polled believe that Make in India campaign is enough to revive manufacturing. As somebody who operates so closely in that sector, is it possible at all without an enabling set of policies and fiscal incentives that seem to be lacking, at least at this stage?
No, I don't think so. I think the campaign itself is just one part of this exercise. It's a marketing part. The product has to be ready. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that for the second time we are launching this product of India, and the experience in the first time around was not all that good. So to some extent, if we market too aggressively, and if the newcomers come and experience this product and if it is not up to mark, then there could be disillusionment. Therefore, I think we must get the product ready, and the product has got a lot to do with getting infrastructure ready, the ease of doing business ready, and if all of that can be put in place quickly in the next few months, then I think we'll see traction. But the mere campaign may not be sufficient. But the campaign is very important and has been brilliantly handled, let me say that.
Campaign is important, but it's not the only thing that's going to get investments in the manufacturing space. That's the view of Mr. R. Seshasayee. But Sanjay, let's talk about the tax issue. You know, ironically though, our CEO poll reveals that India Inc. largely believes the government has walked the talk on tax policies. What is your view? You know, for a government that had promised to end tax terror, does the MAT controversy prove that there is a disconnect between what the political leadership says and what actually happens on the ground?
Look, I think on this issue of MAT and the noise that's around it, I think a lot of it is, I would say the fault lies on both sides. The real fault is the fact that FIs and others did have a very clear answer a couple of years ago when they asked for an advanced ruling, and people chose to ignore it. Now in the current regime, the tax people have come up and said, look, there's a deadline approaching and we better issue notices. So now it becomes a bigger issue. But frankly, I think people chose to ignore it earlier. They should not have, and they should have brought it up with the government earlier. On the government's front, I think they could have just handled the communications a bit better. I think that's the real issue here. But the crux of the issue, frankly, is something that was known. And I think people ignored it, and now it's a reality at the doorstep of the investors. I just hope this government, and I think they have promised that going forward there'll be a lot more clarity. But frankly, the MAT is not an issue of this government. It's been around for a long time. So, that's my view on it here.
Just a while back, I think Dr. Subramanian, who joined us, did say that it has done a lot of damage to the government's own reputation. But Mr. Nayar, I'm going to let you have the last word on this. People thought that the government has 282 seats and enough political capital to push ahead with all kinds of reforms, the second generation as they were being referred. Do you believe that mandate 2014 was actually misread, given the huge legislative logjam that has followed right after?
I think the government has the mandate. It has an overwhelming mandate, which we have never had. And once Lok Sabha decides something, I think that is the law. And if it requires a joint session, so be it. Because people have elected this government and given them its mandate. It being stopped by people who do not have the mandate is frustrating the objectives of a democratic government.
All right, Vineet Nayyar, Sanjay Nayar and R. Seshasayee, thank you so much for joining in with that perspective on this big debate in business tonight on the mood of corporate India as the government completes 1 year in office. Hopefully the second year will be even better for all stakeholders. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Business Tonight.